I played dumb until I had proof. Then I destroyed her in court. That was the plan I whispered to myself over and over, the way a kid repeats a dare until the fear finally bleeds out of it. Only I wasn't a kid. I was a man with a bank account, a legal brief, and a name people knew in a handful of circles. The kind of name that carries a spark of suspicion the moment it's spoken aloud. I'm not sure if that's why I did what I did, or if it was something inside me, a knot I refused to untie, a hunger I mistook for certainty. My name is Daniel Hart. Daniel with a D, because my mother liked the idea of Daniel from the Bible, a good man who spoke truth to power. Hart, because, well, there are two kinds of people in this world, those who stand still and those who move. I learned early I wasn't built to stand still. Not when the world felt like a storm rumbling toward the house with the windows open. The case began, in the way these things always do, as something small and almost laughable. A business associate of mine. No, not associate, a rival. Someone who had learned to count on my silence more than on my generosity, threw a rock into my glass doorway and demanded to know what I'd be willing to say on his behalf. He believed I owed him something after I'd helped him with a merger, something I hadn't quite understood at the time. Loyalty. In my line of work, loyalty is currency, and fear is the ink you sign your name with. Her name was Elena Rossi. She wore a smile that could cut you if you weren't looking. It wasn't a cruel smile, not exactly, but it was practiced, the kind refined through years of social chess, dinners with the right people, the right brand of wine, the right words spoken at exactly the right pace. In the parlor rooms of the city where I grew up, people learned early to measure others by their smiles. Elena had a smile that invited you to trust her, then reminded you of a debt you didn't realize you owed. The case didn't start as a case, at least not in the legal sense. It started as a rumor, a whisper, a thread pulled loose from a larger tapestry, and then tugged again until it became a rope around your neck. The rumor involved a contract we'd hammered out, a business deal that my team swore was clean as a whistle, and Elena believed there was an irregularity hiding in the fine print, something that could be construed as a violation of trust, something that could be used to bring us to our knees. I didn't intend to play dumb. It happened because I believed words were enough to cover up all the little mistakes. I believed I could act like a man who didn't see the obvious, let Elena think I didn't notice the tiny clues, and then, when the time came, bring out the proof that would show I'd never betrayed anyone. Proof that would smear Elena in return, show her not as a consummate professional with a keen mind, but as a schemer who'd tried to pull a fast one on the rest of us. But let me be clear, I didn't hate Elena. Hating someone in that stage of a financial feud would be childish, a high school emotion dressed up in a suit. No, I was fascinated by her, in truth. She represented something I didn't have, an ability to deal with people in a way that felt almost electric, a sense of control that I had learned to pretend I didn't crave. My ego wanted to measure up to her, to prove that I could be just as precise, just as calculating, if not more so. It wasn't about love or hate. It was about the chase. It was about proving to myself that I was better than the whispers, that I could turn suspicion into certainty, and certainty into a victory that would be etched into the record of the city like a badge. The courtroom is not a theater, even though the blinds are drawn and the jury looks like imperfect spectators. A mix of tired mothers, anxious students, a few businessmen who never learn to hide the way they squint when they listen. It's a place where the truth is supposed to be a thing you can hold in your hands, where evidence should be a ladder you can climb to reach the ceiling of what's real. But truth in court is often a mosaic, the kind you can rearrange to tell almost any story. You gather facts, you shape them, you present them with the confidence of someone who believes in the shape of a hammer that can drive a nail into a board of doubt. The first day of the trial, I walked into the courtroom with a quiet self-assurance that felt almost like a shield. I wore a charcoal suit that had seen better days, a tie that was too tight around my neck, and a face that wasn't sure whether it should smile or frown. Elena appeared on the other side of the aisle, a posture of calm strength, the kind that could make a room feel smaller or larger depending on the angle of your ears. In that moment, I felt something like awe and fear. Awe, because I recognized a formidable mind. Fear, because I knew I would have to reveal pieces of me I'd kept hidden for years. I let her talk first. It was a game I'd learned as a boy playing chess with a neighbor who swore he could outrun the sun if he moved fast enough. Let the other person reveal their plan, then respond with a move that would expose the flaw in the plan and leave them gasping for air. Elena spoke with a cadence that was precise and persuasive, peppered with terms that sounded like promises, skin deep, some of them, but with the sheen of inevitability over them. She presented what she called the adjustments made to the contract, the way the numbers slid like smooth stones, the way the margins narrowed until they almost disappeared. It was a dance, a well-rehearsed waltz of facts and figures, and I found myself, for a breath, unable to see the rhythm clearly enough to step in. When my turn came, I did not leap. I did not reveal everything. I played dumb. I let some questions linger, the kind that make a room feel heavier, the kind that, if treated with enough patience, can bend a mind toward doubt. Could there be any misinterpretation here? I asked with an almost boyish curiosity. Could the terms be read another way? My voice carried the tone of a student asking for guidance, not a man delivering a message to be believed without question. The jury watched, not sure whether to trust the confidence in my eyes or the doubt I displayed in my mouth. The strategy worked, in the sense that it kept Elena from seizing the moment she seemed to crave. She could bait, she could push, she could glare into the eyes of the room and make it feel like the air had become too thick to breathe. But I didn't let her get what she wanted. I waited. I gathered data from the edges of the courtroom, from the silent sighs of the clerks, from the slight tremor in Elena's hands when she held a paper too long, as if the numbers in that page might bite her. It wasn't a heroic tactic. It was a survival tactic, a way to keep enough distance to see the edges, to see the seams of the fabric we all wore that day. The more Elena spoke, the more I realized how easy it would be for her to string together a narrative that would condemn us without my ever having to speak a word more than necessary. She wove a story in which our organization appeared as a monolith of greed, a machine with a conscience that needed oiling by someone who wasn't there to figure out the real motive. It's funny how a story can feel so certain, how a story can place you on one side or the other with a flick of a pen. Meanwhile, I was busy discovering something else. Elena wasn't as flawless off the stand as she appeared on it. In the margins of the exhibit boards, in the emails that were passed between both sides, in the notes she hadn't erased, there were small signals, tiny inconsistencies that didn't scream guilt, but whispered it. They looked like the sort of mistakes any rational person could explain away with a tired sigh and a cup of coffee. And yet, when you look at them all together, when you stand back and squint your eyes, they form a portrait of someone who might be protecting a larger truth that doesn't belong to the same story I believed I was telling. I did not crowd Elena with accusations. I did not fling petty insults. I kept my questions steady, my statements simple, my tone controlled, because I believed that a calm voice can do more damage to a claim than a shouted one. The simplest line I delivered, "We may have misread the terms in a way that affects your interpretation, but we have not intended any wrongdoing," was met with a polite nod from the judge and a pair of skeptical glances from the defense. Days turned into weeks, and the case grew heavier around us, like winter pressing in through a cracked window. My team grew leaner, more focused, more tired. We ate meals in the same room and spoke in numbers and dates rather than small talk. Elena remained a force, a living embodiment of the craft she practiced so well. She had a way of bending the air around her, of making questions feel like accusations, of turning a single sentence into a courtroom storm. This is where the moral weight enters the room the way a heavy curtain goes down at a theater's end. I began to feel the ledger of my life, the accounts I had kept in the dim corners of my own mind, start to balance against something I didn't want to admit existed, a fear that what I was doing could hurt someone not merely on paper, but in the actual life that followed. Elena had a family, friends, a reputation she'd spent years building with grit and talent. If the trial didn't go her way, she would endure the consequences, perhaps more quietly than I would ever know how to endure mine. There were nights when I lay awake listening to the city's distant hum and asked myself if this was justice or vengeance dressed up in a suit. The turning point didn't come with a bang. It arrived as an ordinary day, an ordinary moment, really, when Elena presented a document, not a piece of evidence, but a confession, in the shape of a single paragraph tucked into a longer email chain. The paragraph didn't declare guilt. It conceded that there could be misinterpretations, that the clause could be read in two ways. It was enough to create a crack in the defense's structure, enough to feel like a windstorm had just blown through a carefully arranged set of cards. I could have pounced. I could have declared her admission as a smoking gun, as a betrayal of trust, as the moment the entire case would tilt toward us and away from her. But something in me paused. The image of Elena's calm, determined eyes battling for every word, the memory of her smile that betrayed more complexity than any ally could claim, that image held me back. I asked for a recess. I asked for a moment to reflect on whether we were seeing a truth or constructing one to fit a narrative we preferred. I spent those hours walking through the city's parks, letting the breeze wash over me, listening to a street violinist play a sad song that seemed to pull at the corners of my memory. I thought about the friends I had, the ones who believed in me, the ones who would say, "Daniel, you're better than the scheme you're weaving." I thought about the person I had promised to be when I first decided to chase success with a fierce hunger, a hunger that had grown into arrogance without my noticing. I thought about the mothers who taught their children that honesty is the only currency that never depreciates, and I asked myself if I could still claim to be honest, even in the pursuit of victory. When I returned to the courtroom, the air felt heavier, like the glass in the windows had grown denser with each footstep I took. Elena sat poised, waiting for the next question, but her posture conveyed a readiness to both defend and concede. The judge, a soft-spoken woman with a voice that could coax a confession from stone, asked the kind of question that makes a man pause and consider a different path. What is the true measure of success in this case? Is it the outcome of a courtroom or the restoration of trust, or perhaps something more elusive, the sense that justice, in some imperfect form, still has a chance to walk among us? That moment, I believe, was the moment I changed the course of the story, not just for Elena or me, but for everyone who would ever watch this tale unfold in a YouTube video or a courtroom diary. The moment I finally chose to say aloud, to the room, to the judge, to Elena, and to myself, I played dumb, not because I believed it would bring justice, but because I was afraid of the truth in front of me. The truth is not a weapon we wield against others. It is a light we carry to enlighten ourselves. What followed was not a dramatic revelation of guilt and villainy, but a quiet, stubborn honesty. I admitted that I had misinterpreted, that I had allowed a narrative of triumph to push out the moral fiber of the thing we were supposed to protect. The truth, the fairness, the possibility that two sides could walk away with their heads higher than their hearts. Elena listened not with the contempt of a rival, but with the dignity of someone who had spent years refining an argument only to see it tempered by another's honesty. She did not celebrate the turn as a victory. She did what many professionals do in the end. She adjusted, she compromised, she recognized that the best possible outcome might not be the one she originally sought. The verdict that finally arrived came in a form neither of us anticipated. It did not condemn Elena for deceit, nor absolve us of every fault. It declared that certain clauses were ambiguous, and that both sides bore responsibility for the confusion. It awarded some concessions to our company and some to Elena's firm, but more than that, it demanded an ethical reckoning, a commitment to clarity in all future contracts, a promise to communicate with more patience, a pledge to pursue truth rather than victory at any cost. The weeks after the case closed were not a celebration. They were a period of careful, almost clinical, self-re-examination. I met with mentors, with old friends who had watched me walk a tightrope in public, with people who reminded me of where I had begun, the small, hard edges of a life that hadn't yet learned how to soften. Elena did not become my enemy. She became the person who showed me what a man could become when he stops shaping the story to flatter his ego and begins shaping it to honor the truth. If there is a moral line to this tale, it isn't that deception is always bad or that victory is always sweet. It is that a story, no matter how gripping, loses its meaning when told at the expense of someone else's dignity, and that justice, the real kind, the kind that lingers in the lungs of a city and in the quiet rooms of a courthouse, must be balanced by mercy, by restraint, by the refusal to wield a weapon when a hand is needed to lift another up. I did not publish that story in the way I had planned. There would be a YouTube video, yes, as you asked, but not the sensational retributive monologue I once imagined. Instead, I created something calmer, something that could be watched and reflected upon rather than swallowed whole in a single hour. The video would tell the truth of a man who learned to pause, to listen, to admit a fault not with bravado but with humility. It would honor Elena's role in the process, not as a villain or a foil, but as another human being whose life and work deserved respect. The most important thing I hoped the audience would see was this: The courage to step back when stepping forward would do more harm than good, the strength to admit you were wrong, and the stubborn hope that a better version of yourself is possible if you are willing to own your mistakes. If there's a final scene I want to leave you with, it's not the closing argument or the final score. It's a quiet late-night conversation with a friend. A cup of coffee cooling on the desk as the city outside settles into a hush. He asks me, "Daniel, do you feel vindicated?" And I tell him, vindication isn't the point. Closure isn't the point. The point is that I want to move forward as a person who can look at Elena and others like her and say, honestly, I see you. I respect you. I will strive to be better because you helped me see the better parts of myself I didn't want to acknowledge. The story you'll hear in that YouTube video is not a cautionary tale about the dangers of cunning or a triumphal anthem about beating a clever opponent. It's a human story about the messy middle, the space between fear and courage, between pride and humility, between the urge to win and the choice to heal. It's about the fact that we all carry those impulses inside us, and the person who chooses to act with integrity when the crowd would prefer spectacle is, in the end, the strongest kind of winner. In the end, the city moved on, as cities always do, with new cases filing into new rooms, new faces stepping into the light with different names and different ambitions. My name, Daniel Hart, did not fade, but it did change. The letters in my title, JD, a degree that once felt like a shield, now feel like a responsibility. The money I had once believed was a measure of who I was began to look less like wealth and more like a tool, something to be used for building bridges rather than burning them. Elena continued to practice law, and I continued to live in the world we helped shape together, two people who learned that the theater of justice is most powerful when it tells the truth with restraint, when it refuses to turn a courtroom into a stage for revenge. If you watch the video, you'll hear something more than a victory speech. You'll hear a confession of sorts, not to you, the audience, but to the person who stood across the aisle from me and stood for something larger than ourselves. And so I end this story with a simple truth, spoken not as a declaration of triumph, but as a promise. I will not let fear and pride again draw me into a performance where someone else wears the consequences of my choices. I will be worthy of the trust that the city places in its people who stand up in court and speak the language of truth, not as a weapon, but as a beacon. If I can do that, perhaps the next time a case comes along, perhaps any case about money or power or promises broken, I'll choose to do what I should have done from the start. Ask harder questions, listen longer, and let mercy temper justice even when I want to shout, even when I want to win. That is my story, told with the bare hands of a man who learned that the bravest thing you can do in a courtroom is tell the truth about yourself first. And if you've watched this far, and you're a person who loves a good plot about power and cunning, I hope you'll stay for the part that comes after the last sentence. The part where we all decide to become a little better for ourselves, for Elena, and for the next person who sits in a chair across from us, waiting for us to choose what kind of person we will be when the lights come up.